much for being here, everyone. Yes, so Doa asked me to, and the other organizers, they asked me to give an introduction talk about zooarchaeology, so a kind of zooarchaeology 101. And I had a little bit of an idea about what this workshop is about. And clearly, in this year and date, we have quite a bit of introduction to zooarchaeology publications in all sorts of languages, and yeah, a number of sources on YouTube. So I thought I could give it a little bit of a historical touch, at least from my point of view, and fitting to this workshop, which is organized under the umbrella of ARVA. So our focus is Western Asia, Central Asia, and zooarchaeology has been practiced here for a very long time. So I wanted to look at a little bit at just one second, at the development of zooarchaeology, the historical development of zooarchaeology, specifically in these areas. And I found myself, when I was preparing this talk, of course, because I don't study much of the Pleistocene zooarchaeology, Paleolithic zooarchaeology, I have, focused on the Holocene zooarchaeology, so anything, between domestication and onwards. So a little bit of history, and history will involve people, some publications, and of course, some theoretical background. And I will get to talk about how the relationship between zooarchaeology and archaeology, but also zooarchaeology and some other disciplines, how it was embedded in the history of science, just very, very at an introductory level, I hope. Okay, so, and finally, what I hope to show is how the discipline, sort of began at the end of the 19th century and where it is going, how it became so diverse, not only methodologically, but also theoretically today, with a very clear forward-looking paradigm at the moment, I would say. Okay, giving some examples from our own research here. So the early days of zooarchaeology, just like many other historical sciences and natural sciences, we are in between both of these. Of course, it's in the late 19th century, if you don't count Aristotle and really early fossil counters. It's about naturalism and how science starts, as to look like as we know it today. Science is becoming measurement, so we are coming from this antiquarian phase of like looking at strange objects either from the past or from faraway lands in an amazed way. We're starting to measuring them, at least in some parts of the world. And what is now Turkey is not at all outside of these developments, because Turkey has excavations beginning at the end of the 19th century already. And for example, maybe some overlooked, but perhaps you find it trivial fact, is how Schliemann, when he started excavating in Troas, not only Troy, but in the whole area with his team, he had this naturalist with him. This was Rudolf Virchow, who then worked in one of the institutions in Berlin. And he was a Renaissance man. I mean, he was an anthropologist. He was interested in all things natural and cultural at the time. And as it goes, he was also a racist. So he was very interested in categorizing, as you can see, measuring skulls and looking at how they evolved and how they were connected to each other. But he was also interested in animals. So he went to Troy with Schliemann, and he wrote a report in the famous book about, for example, the horses at Troy, or the shellfish that they found, the mollusks they found at Troy during the excavations. And he had an observation, for example, how horses arrived or appeared at Troy 6 about that time in the late Bronze Age, and well, this fact still holds true. So this was also the time when, together with, archaeology was already becoming, in a way, interdisciplinary, and a lot of scientists were looking at ecofacts, as later was termed. We don't use really that term anymore, and not only artifacts. At the same time, this was all not a very linear sort of development. Not because some archaeologists were interested in landscape and the development of natural resources and subsistence and things like that. Not everyone was, right? So during the 2 World War IIs in the Middle East, the 2 World Wars, there's the huge impact of breadwood in the Middle East. His view on landscape archaeology, how we should look at settlements and explain domestication and the like. But at the same time, there was also huge excavations, huge undertakings going on, huge expeditions without really picking up a single bone from the deposits, unless it was like here, what you see on the slide, giant elephant tusks in the middle of a palace. This is Middle Bronze Age, Alala. Then you wouldn't, you had no choice. You couldn't neglect these finds. So there was a variety of different practices in the Middle East. So, I mean, a good question is, where did all this, at the beginning of the 20th century, there are wars going on, a lot of political change in the world, where does all this interest in domestication comes from, domesticated animals come from, and the relationship between human societies, past and present, how can we embed this? I think one good place to look at, apart from the, the obvious, Darwin and his enormous impact in the late 19th century, an obvious place to look at when you look at the history of zooarchaeology is the development of intensive animal husbandry. So yes, the wars have an impact on the world population. The population is growing, but there's a problem with feeding them. So agriculture becomes intensified. Germans discover the fertilizers, the synthetic fertilizers, and there's a lot of experiments going on with domesticated animal breeds. Very fast veterinarian scientists, animal scientists, they're interested in genetics, and they're interested in how this all really works. And that's for a reason. There's a problem to feed growing populations. In a nutshell, you can explain it like that. So all over Europe, in Germany, an area that I tend to know, I know it a little bit better. scientists, specifically veterinary scientists, they develop this interest in phenotypes and how they relate to productivity. So how do we make domesticated animals more productive? That's one of their questions. And while doing that, yes, they look at a lot of skeletons. They collect, they start these really large, now we use them as reference collections, whether in Kiel, for example, or in Halle. I give the Halle example here. Yes, huge collections of local and regional domesticated species, and from all over the world, different, mostly mammals species, skeletons, and they're hybrids, right? This is a donkey, a donkey zebra hybrid, which is clearly an experiment. So then you look at the comparative anatomy of these things, and as it goes, these scientists start talking to archaeologists, and a bunch of them, they have very specific interests in paleoanatomy, so how animals, especially domesticated animals, they developed through time under human impact. The question is, how did humans, man, especially, create domesticated animals, right? They're also interested in the history of veterinary science. So yes, all over Europe, especially continental Europe, you have natural history museums popping up, but also these institutes in universities, dealing with these questions and its history and their history. Okay, so and the early modern Turkey, late Ottoman Empire is not, I mean, some parts of it perhaps, but in general, they're not outside of these developments. They're in contact with Southeast Asia. This is a recent book about the interactions between Hungarian veterinarians and how animal husbandry is becoming modernized in early modern Turkey. And of course, some of these knowledge is interacting with what is to become zooarchaeology. And again, some of these centers or institutes for paleoanatomy, comparative archaeology, and we know them now globally, most importantly, at least from our perspective, with their work in zooarchaeology, especially in the Middle East and in general, Western Asia and other places in the globe. And they are becoming bioarchaeology centers, so diversifying their approaches and methodologies from comparative anatomy. So looking at bones, identifying them to species, etc., looking at the breed, sex, and so on and so forth, to increasingly more biomolecular archaeology. So this is the example of Munich. And there's a very interesting development going on as we see, in the Anglo-Saxon history of archaeology, we usually talk about new archaeology and how paleoeconomy developed. That is going on in the late 60s, early 70s, into the 80s in North America and the UK, in the continent, together with Anglo-Saxon colleagues. So archaeologists, they start coming together. And one of the reasons why this is happening together with Southeast Europe is science diplomacy, in a way. So this is a period, well, I find this really relevant, especially this week. This is a period when we have the Iron Curtain, right? It's completely separate. People, including scientists, they cannot travel from even two parts of Berlin. You see here Sandor Bikani, so he needs a special permission to travel from Hungary to Western Germany and onwards and so on. And this time, and the beginning of the 70s, zooarchaeologists get together to talk about, yes, what is called at the time domestication research. Well, it still is domestication research, and with a very strong interest in the history of domesticated animals. So this is one of the landmark meetings, and then they keep on meeting regularly, and about 80% or more of the prominent figures in zooarchaeology, very influential figures and institutions, they have worked in Western Asia. Well, because it became pretty early clear that if they wanted to document and trace the origins of the most important domesticated animals for especially Europe, but also North America, this is somewhere where they had to look at. So another landmark publication is this approaches to faunal analysis in the Middle East, where you can see a clear interest in paleoeconomies, what people ate, how people produced their domestic animals, and so on. So, and this, they realize in the meantime that they call the science, they give the science different names, right? In moving from domestication research, including Paleolithic zooarchaeology, encompassing anything we do with, embracing anything we do with animal remains in archaeology in general. Yes, so the Anglo-Saxon traditions, they call it zooarchaeology, and in continental Europe, it's generally termed archaeozoology, and often there's a discussion like, what is the difference? Yes, the difference is told, usually the common story is that zooarchaeology is the approach to animal remains in archaeology from an anthropological point of view, so putting the humans first, whereas archaeozoology is really focusing on biology and animals, and giving the perspective of very specifically economy and zoology, etc., etc. Well, I see there are German-speaking people in the audience. They can correct me too, if I'm mistaken. As I understand, in the Germanic languages, you cannot really say zooarchaeology because that sounds as if you're doing the archaeology of zoos. So grammatically, archaeozoology would be the natural way of calling it. And you will see that, well, at least in my opinion, there's no difference, at least nothing to fight about in these terminologies. This is an old discussion. We shouldn't dwell too much, in other words. So yes, so meanwhile, though, zooarchaeology, or yes, this perspective of impact of anthropology on zooarchaeology is growing. Well, in general, in both the UK and North America, zooarchaeology is growing with a lot of interest in hunter-gatherer societies, and of course there's the birth of processual archaeology, new archaeology. And in a nutshell, I mean, there is a lot of different viewpoints even within new archaeology, but one of the main focuses of new archaeology is how humans, well, it's definitely an anthropocentric viewpoint, humans are in the foreground, and whatever they're doing is they're doing this to adapt to the environment, right? But more importantly for us also, I put Binford here, of course, and Binford's, yes, many seminal books and papers. Archaeology is putting much more emphasis on these, yes, now so-called ecofacts. And we're starting to collect animal bones much more systematically and so on. So this is also, quantification in archaeology is becoming huge, and zooarchaeology is of course not spared from any of these. So the terms like we use every day today, number of identified specimens, we count the bones, right? And there are many different ways of doing that. So these are the years in the 80s, starting with the late 70s, in the 80s, quantification in archaeology is ripening, and even for many, this is the only way to do archaeology, right? So it's becoming already pretty sciencey in a way. And one of the prominent figures here for us working in Western Asia, especially in Turkey, is Sebastian Payne. He was a British Institute fellow in 1970 something, Benjamin would know. And many of the pioneer works, including number of identified specimens, for example, or the way we look at mortality profiles today, survivorships borrowed from zoology, ecology, to our science, was introduced by, well, almost single-handedly by this man, and he owes his, most of his empirical work was based in Turkey. The famous Ashwan Kale article in the Anatolian Studies has become the backbone of so many zooarchaeological studies to come, and all targeting to understand production models. How do we herd animals so that humans, we get milk, wool, we have a bigger herd, and so on. Yeah, so very specific polyeconomic thought here. And there are different versions of these animals, domesticated animals, well, hunted animals. They are, yes, first and foremost are seen as subsistence resources. So there's a ton of studies in this, with this approach being produced, very influential, and again, lots of work in Southwestern Asia here. So around the same time, there is a reaction to new archaeology, and of course, post-processualism, one of the leading figure here is Ian Hodder, right? And this person is an archaeologist, not a zooarchaeologist. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. And we know him best with his work, of course, at Çatalhöyük, and his many ideas, influence from sociology, philosophy, and things like that. But it's interesting to see how, especially his early work, is influenced by structural anthropology. So he's very interested in symbols, material culture as symbols. Whatever in archaeology we uncover, these must have, certain structural meanings. And he actually still retains this view. So this is also a time in anthropology, indeed, people like Levi Strauss, well, this is a little bit earlier, but his students to many students, including Descola and so on. This really later stuff, but yeah, animals are seen as symbols. They weren't just food. They meant yeah, something to a lot of societies. They still do, and they are so mirrors and windows to human societies, how they think, what they believe in, and they are good to think with, as Levi-Strauss said very famously. So yeah, things are changing. Yeah, so this also changes the way we see animal remains in archaeology. So for Ian Hodder, probably one of the reasons why Çatalhöyük was obviously, he wasn't directly interested in animals per se, but there's a lot of, Çatalhöyük obviously is one of the places at the time before Göbekli Tepe and so on, where this animal symbolism, the meaning of animals is very pronounced for early human societies in the early Holocene, so obvious place to go. And how this evolves is, fast forwarding through the post-processualism discoveries at Çatalhöyük is, a whole new place for human-animal interactions in general, but including how we look at domestication, relationships with herds, and so on and so forth, right? And in one sense, zooarchaeology is, as always, in a way, lagging behind. But one pioneer work is by Nerissa Russell, who advocates social zooarchaeology. And her work, too, as some of you will know, is starts in the Balkans, and it's mainly based on Çatalhöyük, looking for the meaning in hidden meaning in animal bones, while reconciling this perspective with new zooarchaeology, new archaeology, still quantifying animal bones, still looking at species, and so on and so forth, right? At just around the same time, with all this coming into place, while we're rethinking human-animal relationships, of course, one of the game changers, one of the fundamental changes is happening. This is still the paradigm in a way we work with today, is the description of pathways to domestication. So animals were not just as food, and humans are not, they do have the upper hand, according to Zieder at least, but things were not necessarily always intentional. So humans were not controlling, they were not animals, and it wasn't all about paleoeconomy. So this is the way we start thinking with the turn of the millennium. And one of the ways we start thinking of domestication is a much more organic process that is shortly described as niche construction, partly. Yeah, that's one way of explaining this. So as humans settle, there are different niches, new niches for both humans and animals, which enable them to come closer and closer to each other, starting off commensal interactions. And the classic example is pigs. And later we understand that, yes, the domestication of pigs, as well as other animals, were multifarious, many layered interactions. It wasn't a revolution as Child and other people described it to be. So while environmental adaptation, this, humans have to change their behavioral ways to adapt changing environments, changing climates, we as a whole, whether it's biology or anthropology, in many sciences, we start understanding, right? We started understanding that, yes, we are changing the climate ourselves. The beginning of the Anthropocene thinking, the understanding of the Anthropocene. So polluting, the environment, changing landscapes, geomorphologies, and so on. These are the things that we have to deal with on a daily basis today, apart from the war and wars, climate change. So all of a sudden, gradually, but well, as far as I can see, rather rapidly in recent years, bones take a whole new meaning to explain and let us help us understand the deeper Anthropocene, right? Not only the 21st century Anthropocene that is like so obvious and to our faces, but also how did it begin? Where did it begin? Because bones, of course, animal bones from archaeological sites, going from a human filter, they have archived all this information. So this is sort of the, if you take social zooarchaeology on the one hand and the Anthropocene thinking and Anthropocene approaches on the other hand, these are sort of the two key things that zooarchaeology tends to work with today. In this way, in this sense, so this is how a couple of the projects we work with today, one of them is sea changes, the other one has to do with the emergence of animal domestication, animal husbandry in the Netherlands. These are the paradigms we work with today. For example, sea changes looks at a lot of different taxa in the world, mostly in Europe, but also Eastern Mediterranean, marine taxa, marine vertebrates, and tries to understand the thresholds in human exploitation, to be more specific, where after the human impact on threatened taxa, right? Such as sea turtles, for example. There is a good amount of sea turtle remains in archaeological sites in the Mediterranean, or we look at economically important fish, such as the chipra, you will all know, or the orphos, the groupers, looking at their anatomy, how they changed in size, for example, through time, but also looking at their stable isotopes to understand their changing foraging ecology. And the underlying assumption is that this all happened under, well, of course, there were different things going on in the marine environments, but there was always a human element. So we look at their population genetics, whether diversity has changed over time during the Holocene or not. So this is about sea changes, very Anthropocene driven project. I will skip this one. And while all of this is happening, of course, that's only the, let's say, the wild side, but we're redefining our relationships to domestic animals as well, right? We're thinking that, this wasn't a progressive process from hunting, gathering to farming. This is clear now. We're treating animals badly, in return, we are getting sick, and so on, right? So there's a very clear reason to think beyond the dualisms of nature and culture. And so some of our domestication work or domesticated animals work is looking at it more holistically in all sorts of interactions between animals and humans today. Yes, and that was that.